Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sister, the weekly show presented by Women's Prosperity Network that shines a light on what racism looks like every day in America in the lives of people of color. And it's my pleasure to be here today with the fabulous me, Allen. I am Trish Carr, one of the co-founders of Women's Prosperity Network, and I always try to pick the most interesting people. And Sydney is truly interesting, where she comes from a varied background, having been an intuitive all her life. Like, I would love to be more intuitive. I wonder if that's something you can learn. You can tell me about that for sure. She's been intuitive all her life, and her business Soul Energies Aligned, as well as, do you still do Scott's Treasures?
I haven't been doing much of the jewelry lately.
Yeah,
but
she
it's
does
still
this jewelry. It's worth mentioning. Does this beautiful jewelry that's all about the energy, which is really what Sydney's goal in life is, to make a difference for people by helping them, showing them, and working with them to tap into the energy that we all have so that we can create what we want in our life. And like I said, she's got a really varied background. She has worked at the State University of New York in Albany, which is where she lives, in that general area in upstate New York. Beautiful place in the mountains, you lucky woman. Nice place to live.
Yes.
She's also worked with herbs and teas and has a background in that. And like I said, in her Soul Energies Aligned business, she makes a difference for people. She also does card readings, which we're going to do one of those, because as we are doing this discussion together today, it's a full moon. And so what's
the lunar eclipse?
Yeah, and the lunar eclipse. So did the lunar eclipse happen last night, or is it tonight?
I honestly don't remember the exact hour. So for the Eastern time zone, I'm not sure where we fell, but we're in the energy for the next 3 days.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it was, I saw on TV, it was 4:30 in the morning Monday. So it must have been the overnight.
Yeah, so it's just a few hours ago.
And we live in that energy for the next 3 days?
Yes.
So what's the significance of that, like the energy of a lunar eclipse?
The energy of a lunar eclipse is like taking the energy of the full moon and turbo boosting it. It's bigger, it's deeper, and it lasts much longer. There are parts of that energy that are around you and in you for upwards of 6 months.
Wow.
Whereas as opposed to just its biggest punches in the next 3 days of a regular full moon, but it's like it's almost like a painting that has an undercurrent of a color that lunar energy stays with us, and we can keep working with it to balance what we're looking to balance, or release what we need to release. Because with the full moon, your energy is mostly all filled up. I had a teacher at a beautiful description of saying, imagine you had a cup of water that was full to the brim, and then you took a pitcher and you poured water in that cup. Those are your full moon emotions.
So you're overflowing.
You're just overflowing. And sometimes that's overwhelm, and sometimes that's just like overflowing, like a huge flower opening up. Just like it's more and it's more.
So now would be the time to go for the things that you want, and for speaking your mind, and for just putting yourself out there. Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah,
that's wonderful.
A lot of times,
enjoy that.
Yes, it's the fruition. It's what's bubbling up.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I wasn't sure what the full moon significant was, but it seems like it's something we definitely want to tap into the next 3 days for sure.
Yeah.
So thanks for that. And thanks for being here. I really
you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. You and I were talking about growing up in New York City. You grew up in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Brooklyn and moved to Long Island and back to Queens. You too, Queens, right?
Yeah, I lived in Queens until I went to college, but I
Right,
went
you
to
went to
school in
school in
Manhattan.
Manhattan, right? You went
Yeah.
to high school in Manhattan. And so, and now you live in upstate New York. So I know that there's a difference. Like I know for me that growing up in New York, although I lived in a white neighborhood, I went to school with people of varying backgrounds, mostly
Mhm.
other white girls, Puerto Ricans, and probably 10% black. But I rode the subway every day,
Yeah.
right? It was like literally to go to school, I took the bus and the subway. So I was surrounded by all kinds of different brown, beige, blue, green, yellow people, right?
Yeah.
And then I moved to Florida and it was very different. I'm sure you experienced something like that when you moved to upstate New York.
Yeah, upstate is quite a bit more homogenous. There's there I mean there's in office settings in the cities you have more of a mix, but I definitely found myself having the experience of being the only one in many more settings than I did growing up in New York City. And so many more people where this was all they knew.
Mm.
You know, Manhattan, even though it's only 150 miles away, was like another planet.
Yeah.
Another
Yeah.
planet.
Well, and I
And
remember you telling me, you mentioned to me that when you first moved upstate, that when you would be driving, that oftentimes there would be a cop car following you.
yeah, there are some high-end neighborhoods that as I would drive through, if I was alone, I would notice that. I would
Yeah.
notice that. It wasn't being pulled over, but I would notice that they were there. And it would be interesting because they'd be neighborhoods where I would go through them when I was with somebody white and it didn't happen. That
Yeah.
was what was
Mhm.
the tip off, like, oh, don't stop here.
Yeah. It's funny. It's not funny. And I hear that often. We always hear
Mhm.
about Black men being targeted, if you will, by the police
Yeah.
and followed by the police, et cetera. But you don't hear it in, the normal ways you hear about things, the media, that women too deal with
Oh
that.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are, there's a whole host of other assumptions. It's not necessarily that being perceived as dangerous the way Black men are perceived as dangerous.
Yeah.
Um, but that not being welcome is very clear.
Yeah.
And I noticed it when my mother came to visit. There was, certain shops, and she was actually more acute to it than I was. That, coming out in the parking lot one time and just turning to me and said, don't you ever bring me in there again." And I was like, what do it was the being watched every time you stopped and picked something up.
At a retail store.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
I've heard that
those,
before. I've heard that before. Uh,
yeah.
Simone, when we talked, uh, see Simone Rivers, she was
Oh,
sharing
yeah.
experience. I know you know Simone.
Mm-hmm.
Those experiences that she had, that she shared about being in a retail store, and how she wasn't, first of all, she wasn't even offered, "Can I help you?"
Can I help you? Right.
Which
Exactly.
was something also I didn't really know. I never heard that, but Lawana Bradford, who you may know, also introduced
Mm-hmm.
me to that concept. She said, when you walk into a store, you have to beat the
Find
salespeople
somebody.
away. Go, "No, I don't need any
Yeah.
help. Leave me
Right.
alone." She goes, "I would be so happy if somebody would say, 'Can I help you?' to me. But the only
Mm-hmm.
time they do is when I'm with a white girlfriend."
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So that's the kind of thing that you see day in and day out, right? It's not that people
Yes.
are in your face calling you racial epithets. It's that these
No.
little insidious, and your mother sees it more. Why do you think your mother sees it more than you do?
I think because my mother came up in segregation, you know, and where that was, so she had she has a much keener view of it.
Yeah.
You know, her experiences were much more in your face. I mean, you know, I remember her telling me about walking into a department store when my brother was young, like, you know, maybe 5 or younger, and the salesperson coming up to her and asking for her note, wanting to know where her note, this was in the late 40s, of her note from her white employer.
That she was there to buy something for her white employer?
That was their feeling, was that was the only reason that was the only acceptable reason as to why she would be in, you know, why else would she be in there? You know,
Wow.
my father was a professional, but that was inconceivable.
Yeah, that your father would be a professional.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. You're either a housekeeper or working in a restaurant or something
Right.
like that. So
Yeah.
so then growing up with your mom and dad who experienced racism at a much more uh, keen level, like you said. So what was it like for you in terms of that? Like, how did they educate you, socialize you? Was it something they talked about? Because obviously,
Oh
like,
yeah, my father was a prominent civil rights leader in New York in the 60s and well, throughout. But
throughout his life, if he was
yeah.
if
And
he was an
so
activist, he was an activist.
I was raised that I was raised on the wrongness, and you can't judge a book by its cover, and all of this stuff about equality. But I think they did it too well. I kind of exceeded their expectation because I didn't feel the sense of danger. I didn't feel the sense. I took them at their word.
Right.
And that all of these other things were happening because these people were idiots. And I was sorry they were idiots, but because I grew up in a predominantly white European environment. I grew up in an international school, but the majority of students were from somewhere else, but the predominantly they were white.
Yeah. Well, you went international school. They're all from other countries?
Yes. Yeah. They're I used to joke that I didn't really learn all 50 states, the idea that people really lived in all 50 states until I was in college.
Because you were with people from all different countries.
Right. I could go anywhere in the world, but I only knew people in the US in 3 different states.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had all of this socialization from your parents, but you didn't really experience it because you were living in a diverse area.
Right.
And you weren't treated differently because of your color in the UN International School.
No, there was a difference. It wasn't perceived by me. There was, in hindsight, there were definitely those teachers who actually the way it was transmitted was a lower expectation.
Oh.
You know, there not you know, any kind of like anything I accomplished was this huge surprise.
And you didn't see that with other kids.
No, there were other kids who were doing a lot or being asked to do a whole lot more. And I think that it's a real danger in children because you're much more susceptible to taking it personally.
Yeah.
That it's not about, and it's also, I think that happens anywhere where there's that when you're one of few, you don't necessarily see it as happening to you because of a group that you belong to. In not seeing it happen to other children, to other kids, it didn't say to me that it was because I was Black. It was just individuals that it didn't happen to.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and it's funny you say in hindsight, like you didn't see
Yes,
it,
it was.
experience it.
I
But you
didn't.
know what your teachers think of you, what your leaders think of you. I mean, we rise to the level of expectation, and yet you were able to rise beyond their low expectation.
Yeah.
What do you attribute that to?
Well, I definitely attribute that to my family.
Yeah.
Because, you know, education was everything. There was no not going to college. There was no more not going to college than there was not brushing my teeth.
Right.
You know, my huge act of rebellion was to not go to graduate school.
Wow. And,
I was like,
that's such a common stereotype that education, isn't necessarily something that you see people of color, well, Black people in particular, right? But in other cultures, it's an expectation, but people don't realize it's an expectation of your parents and where your parents came from, and because your father was a professional, it was something that was important to him,
right?
To your mom,
Right.
So then you left New York, and that's when you started to see on a regular basis.
I started to see
racism.
Yeah. It was made clear to me. I was also in settings where I was part of a group of other people, of other Black people, and not just other people of color, and could see that difference. And people shared those stories. There's both a safety net and a danger in that being one of the only ones. You know, I mean, there was a certain amount of privilege I got from that.
Yeah.
And, that, like the exotic flower type thing. But there was also what I realized later, there was an isolation in that. There was an unawareness, like things that I honestly believed were specific to my family, that was part of a whole culture that I wasn't participating in.
So give me an example of that.
Oh, I knew that was coming, and I was like, and now, right now, all the things I can think of are the ones that were, I can't think of one right now.
Yeah,
it's funny because now all the ones that are coming up are saying, oh no, that really is an Allen thing, or that really is my grandmother's thing.
Oh, I see. I see.
But there was that, and it's like my siblings grew up in a Black community, and they were part of it. So there's quite a bit older than me, and there was a real distinction from how they were treated in one arena versus another arena.
Right. Right. But you grew up more in a homogeneous area, with high
Right.
school and everything like that.
Yeah.
One of the things you said when we were talking earlier was that you always felt like you had to make other people comfortable around you. Tell me a little
Oh
bit
yeah.
about that.
Particularly when I would, I don't know exactly what made me start doing it, except that I am a recovering people pleaser.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. Well, my mother would probably argue that point, but outside of my immediate family, it was
Yes.
pretty. So that when I would feel that sense of exclusion or diminishment from others, particularly in the work environment, that then it was that feeling that I couldn't do enough in whatever the job was. And my response was to try and make that supervisor my best friend. Like, well, you don't want to see me, you can't see me as a good or a valuable employee. I'll become valuable to you in this other way. And it took me a long time to realize that some part of me thought if I could make them comfortable enough, then they would see.
That they would see that you do a good job and you're somebody that can be counted on.
Right. But it was, but it didn't, I mean, I'm retired now. It never worked.
Yeah. You decided to
I
do
think there
your
were
own
times I
thing.
deluded myself that it worked.
Yeah.
But yeah, but there did come that place where I finally got that it was not me making up for me. It wasn't that I had to make up for me.
Right.
It just wasn't mine. But that is, I'm sure I'm not the only Black woman who's taken that route.
Well,
And
it's not the first time I've heard I have to work harder than my white counterparts or my male counterparts.
oh yeah,
you got the double trouble. You're white and you're a woman
right.
and you're Black.
Yeah.
As a woman, you have to.
And I'm combative. So it was that that means I will only do half as much, because you're not going to make me do that. I'm not having it. Yeah. I'm just not,
So how about working in the retail field yourself and being probably the only Black woman behind the cash register, and most of the customers would probably be white, considering the area that you did that retail work?
Yeah, there's a pretty, yes, that's true. Most of the customers are, but there's a pretty significant, in the herbal community, there's a pretty significant Black and Caribbean customer base and population. But it's been abundantly clear that it was a pleasant surprise when they saw me. There was a gravitational, but it is for me in the retail, it is, there hasn't been that much of, it fades for me as I get older. I think it's an American thing. Your power base, your threat level, you become more and more neutralized the older you get, particularly as a woman.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you know, in the retail experience, in, you know, in the herbal community, it's been the biggest difference that I've noticed is that customers of color have a level of relaxing that they didn't, you know, there's an expression of,
Yeah.
oh, well, you know,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
you know, like I can really talk to you kind of thing.
And they can
But
let their guard down.
yes,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. So you're seeing it from the other side, which is really interesting
right,
as well.
yeah,
Yeah. So, I also hear about microaggressions, like, and I'm sure you probably got some of those when you were in school as well, but, it's the, oh, you're so articulate.
oh yeah,
You're so well spoken, or, oh,
so
how did you do that to your hair? Those things
yeah,
that we as who are socialized white don't realize. Like for me, a big thing I'd learned by doing these conversations with other women of color, is the word gal. I had no idea that gal was, for many Black
uh,
women, relates back to a house gal, which was a slave uh,
yeah,
designation. And that when
mhm,
someone calls you gal, it gives you, I don't know if that's true for you, but I've heard it from multiple people. So there are little microaggressions that we hear all the time. So
yeah.
in considering that, what would you say to people who want to raise their awareness, white people in particular? Because this is a white problem, racism. This is one that we've got to do something about. What would you suggest to people so that they could raise their awareness, uh, just see where they may have racial tendencies that are racist? Anything you would suggest? For me, it's always, let's have conversations about this stuff.
Yeah, to have conversations about it, to work on actually to recognize that there are places that you go where you are heard, where um what's the difference, where you are welcomed as opposed to being tolerated, and that to take that privilege and use it to be an ally.
Ah, use it to be an ally. And that's exactly what we're doing.
I mean, that was the most powerful thing that I remember when I was in high school, was that I had a best friend who was Dutch, you know, classic blonde haired, blue eyed. We were in a class where a guest speaker had come, and she was from Columbia Teachers College. And she tried to give us this lecture on how slavery really wasn't that bad, and how much more difficult things were for Black people after the abolition of slavery. And I was, I mean, I think I was still, when I think of it, it just struck kind of dumb. Like, really? Like, when is the punchline coming? This can't really be happening. And all of a sudden realizing that if I said anything, there was a level that would not be heard. And just as that was going through my mind, Sarah, who was my best friend at the time, jumped up and pitched a fit. Was just like, I can't believe this. Actually, have you lost your mind? And she was, and I watched this woman who was standing, and she was a young woman. She was probably still in her 20s. And I was like, oh my God, she would not have heard any of that if it had come out of my mouth.
You're right. You're right.
And that was, you know, it's that when you see something, it's the when you see something, say something.
Yes.
You know, there, you know, those, you talked about the microaggressions there, and you know, the little jokes that are said or something, that for me to say something is about me personally, and it's about me getting my feelings hurt.
Yeah.
It's different when it comes from,
Right. From me.
it's different from
If it
you.
comes from a
It's
white
different.
woman, this is
It's
wrong. It's actually
right,
taken with more value.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, not every time, but it is that's where the change can happen.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for reminding us all of that, because that's where we can come in. When you
Yeah.
see something, say something. And that's the truth. When you see something that's not right, say something about it not being right.
Yeah.
Because Sydney won't be taken seriously. You're right. It'll be about you. So, Sydney, thank you so much for being
Oh,
with
you're
me
very
today,
welcome.
for sharing
Thank
your
you.
experience and your thoughts. I appreciate you so much.
And I appreciate you. This was great.
Wonderful. Great to have you. And thank you, everyone, for watching. I appreciate you all being here and being the change you want to see in the world. Like Sydney says, it's about taking our white privilege, which we really do have simply because of the color of our skin, and using it to be advocates for those who are being treated differently and not treated in a good way. So thank you all.
Trish,
Yes.
I want to catch you on one thing.
Yes.
You're in that advocate,
Yeah.
in the ally versus the advocate,
Gotcha.
we're here. Again, we're find the mirror. And in the advocate, it's
here.
that parental thing. Yeah.
I gotcha. Thank you so much for that. Oh my gosh, that's it right there. I'm writing it down. It's not an advocate, it's an ally.
Yeah.
See, I just got another aha. Every single week we get ahas. And that's
Yeah.
what this is about, is for us to get ahas so that we can be an ally, so we can make the difference, and so we can be the change. Sydney, thank you for that.
Thank you.
I
And
honor
thank you for hearing it.
Yes, my pleasure. My pleasure. And thank you all for being with us. We'll see you again next week for another Sister to Sister.